Isla Carrick had been arguing with a painting for 3 hours, and the painting was winning. "You're wrong," she told the canvas, jabbing her brush at the lower left quadrant where the shadows refused to behave. "You're objectively, structurally wrong, and I need you to know that I know that, even if I can't fix it yet." The canvas said nothing, because it was a canvas. This was, Isla reflected, the healthiest relationship she'd had in 2 years. From the windowsill, Gremlin, 7 pounds of orange tabby with the moral compass of a war criminal, watched her with the particular disdain cats reserve for humans who talk to inanimate objects at 2 a.m. He had already knocked her jar of cadmium yellow off the table twice tonight. The second time had been deliberate. She'd seen the calculation in his eyes. "Don't judge me," she said. "You lick your own stomach for entertainment." Gremlin yawned, showing every one of his tiny, useless teeth, and went back to staring at the fire escape outside the window. He'd been doing that a lot lately, staring at something in the dark that Isla couldn't see. Cats, she figured. Or rats. Or the general existential void that all cats seem to find so compelling. She stepped back from the canvas, wiped her hands on her overalls, and took stock of her life. Studio. Chaotic, paint-splattered, smelling of turpentine, and the Thai food she'd forgotten to refrigerate. Career. 1 gallery showing tomorrow night that could either launch her into legitimate visibility or confirm every fear she had about being a talented amateur playing dress-up. Bank account. A number she had stopped looking at 3 weeks ago on the advice of her therapist, who she could no longer afford. And yet, things had been strangely, inexplicably good lately. The landlord who'd been trying to raise her rent had suddenly developed a passionate interest in not doing that, following what he'd described as a surprise tax situation. The rare cobalt pigment she'd been hunting for months had appeared on her doorstep in a hand-wrapped package with no return address. Her heater, ancient, temperamental, the kind of appliance that made noises like a dying whale, had been replaced free of charge by a repair company that claimed she'd won a community improvement lottery she had definitely not entered. "I'm not complaining," she told Gremlin. "I'm just noting that the universe doesn't usually hand out cobalt pigment to people who can't pay their electric bill." Gremlin's ears rotated toward the fire escape again. His body went very still. "You're creeping me out," Isla informed him. She crossed the studio to close the window, and as she did, she felt it. A draft of cold air that had nothing to do with the October night. It settled on her skin like a hand, and for a single, irrational moment, she had the absolute certainty that she was being watched. Not the vague paranoia of a woman alone in a city at night, but a specific, physical sensation, as if someone's gaze had actual weight. She leaned out the window and looked. Fire escape, empty. Rooftop across the alley, dark. The city hummed its usual insomniac hum. Sirens in the distance, a couple arguing 3 floors down, the perpetual low roar of traffic that never fully died. Nothing. "Okay," she said to nobody. "Cool. Not unsettling at all." She closed the window, locked it, and went back to arguing with her painting. The cold lingered. 587 years of unlife, and Kieran had just been outwitted by an orange cat. The creature had spotted him on the adjacent rooftop, a feat that should have been impossible given that Kieran was functionally invisible in the dark, a king of shadows who had evaded detection by beings far more formidable than a 7-pound tabby. But the cat had locked eyes with him through the window, and in those flat, amber irises, Kieran had seen a look of frank appraisal that suggested the cat knew exactly what he was looking at, wasn't impressed, and was considering whether the information was worth trading for a treat. He did not care about the cat. He cared about her. The bond had struck him 3 nights ago, and it had unmade him. He had been on his throne, obsidian and cold silver, the seat from which he had ruled the nocturnal world for centuries, when a single, impossible note of resonance had shattered the frozen lake of his consciousness. It sang of sun-drenched apricots and salt-laced wind, of charcoal and linseed oil, of a living soul that was a perfect harmonic to his own dead one. The thirst, his oldest companion, had transformed from its usual low ache into something he had no word for. Not hunger. Need. The kind that remade the architecture of the self. He had found her that first night, followed the golden thread through the sleeping city, past the million interchangeable mortal lives that were just noise now, static against her signal. And he had settled on this rooftop, a gargoyle in a bespoke suit, and watched her argue with a painting. He had watched her talk to the cat. He had watched her step back, tilt her head, chew her lower lip, and lean forward to make a brushstroke that she immediately hated. He had watched her for 4 hours, and in those 4 hours, he had felt more than he had felt in the previous 4 centuries. The thirst was a problem. Not the predatory thirst of a fledgling who could not tell the difference between hunger and rage. Kieran had mastered that particular beast before the Ottoman Empire fell. His thirst was refined, controlled, the distant hum of a furnace in a well-managed house. He fed when necessary, from willing donors whose memories he edited with the precision of a surgeon. It was clinical. It was enough. Until her. Her blood. He could smell it from here, through brick and glass and the competing scents of turpentine and forgotten Thai food, was not a meal. It was a symphony. It was the olfactory equivalent of the first warm day after an ice age. Every dead cell in his body strained toward it. His fangs ached in his gums with a specificity that was almost embarrassing. He was a king. He had conquered territories, outlived empires, and personally dispatched no fewer than 3 would-be usurpers. He should not be undone by the smell of a woman's blood from 60 feet away. And yet, the thirst whispered. It had been doing that more lately. Not words exactly, but impressions, warmth, closeness, the imagined sensation of a pulse against his lips. He told it to be quiet. It did not listen. It never did. Dawn was approaching. He could feel it the way a sailor feels a storm, a pressure change in the atmosphere, a subtle warming of the eastern sky that was, for his kind, a ticking clock. The Great Eraser. He had perhaps 40 minutes before the sun crested the skyline and turned the open rooftop into a crematorium. He took one last look at her. She was asleep now, slumped in a paint-stained armchair with the cat on her chest, her face slack and peaceful and so heartbreakingly mortal, and retreated. He dropped from the rooftop to the alley below, a 6-story fall that he absorbed without sound, and moved through the pre-dawn streets as a ripple of shadow. His keep was 40 minutes away by mortal transport. He made it in 6. The stone corridors closed around him like a fist. His courtiers stood in the great hall, silent and ancient, their own centuries of unlife having scoured away anything as frivolous as a greeting. They sensed his agitation. They did not comment on it. They knew better. He descended to the vault, sealed the doors against the coming light, and lay in the dark, with the echo of her heartbeat still thrumming in his skull. Thump, thump. Thump, thump. A ghost rhythm in his silent chest. He had to meet her. The watching was not enough. The bond demanded more, and he was discovering that arguing with a cosmic imperative was about as productive as arguing with a painting. He needed a plan. The gallery was the kind of sterile white box that made Isla feel like she was being exhibited rather than exhibiting. She'd worn a dress, which she regretted. She'd put on lipstick, which she regretted more. She felt like a Labrador retriever someone had wrestled into a cocktail outfit. Technically dressed, spiritually fraudulent. Her largest piece, 4 feet by 6 feet, a chaos of deep blues and violent oranges that she'd titled Thermal, occupied the back wall, and she kept glancing at it to make sure it hadn't spontaneously become terrible since she'd hung it that afternoon. So far it was holding, but the night was young. Stop staring at your own painting like it's going to run away. Chloe said, pressing a glass of wine into Isla's hand. Chloe was her oldest friend, a nurse practitioner with the bedside manner of a drill sergeant and the unwavering belief that Isla's life would be vastly improved by a boyfriend and a better moisturizer. "You look amazing. The work looks amazing. Drink this and stop vibrating." "I'm not vibrating. I'm experiencing a normal amount of professional anxiety." "You're vibrating at a frequency that's going to shatter this wine glass. Drink." Isla drank. Then she saw him. He entered the gallery the way winter enters a room, all at once, silently, and with an immediate, noticeable drop in temperature. He was tall, pale, and dressed in a suit that probably cost more than her annual rent. His hair was dark, his features severe and classical in a way that made her think of Roman statuary, the kind of face that expected to be carved in marble and would be justified in the expectation. He moved through the sparse crowd with a grace that was just slightly wrong, the way a predator's grace is wrong, too smooth, too controlled, too aware of every body in the room. But it was his stillness that caught her. When he stopped walking, he stopped entirely. No fidgeting, no weight shifting, no unconscious adjustments. He simply was, rooted in place like something that had been standing there for centuries and saw no reason to change the arrangement. "Who," Chloe said, her wine glass pausing halfway to her mouth, "is that?" "I have no idea, but he looks like he was manufactured in a lab specifically to intimidate art students." The broker, a man named Ellis, whose primary talent was knowing rich people, materialized at her elbow. "Isla, this is Mr. Kalin. He's a private collector, very selective, and he's specifically interested in your work." She looked up at Kalin. His eyes were dark gray, the color of a stormy sea, and when they met hers, she felt a jolt of something she couldn't name. Recognition, maybe, or the sudden irrational sense that she had been waiting for something without knowing it. And here it was. The feeling was so strong it was physical. Her heart did something stupid in her chest. "Ms. Carrick," he said, and his voice was low, formal, and slightly archaic. The voice of a man who had learned English from very old books and had never entirely updated. "Your work is most accomplished." Most accomplished. Isla's brain, traitor that it was, immediately supplied the subtitle, 4 stars on medieval Yelp. "Thank you, Mr. Kalin," she said. "I'm glad you think so." She extended her hand. He looked at it for a beat, just a fraction of a second too long, as if he were steeling himself for something, and then took it. His hand was ice cold. Not cool from being outside cold, not poor circulation cold, cold the way stone is cold, the way metal is cold in winter. A deep, structural cold that suggested his skin had never been warm. The handshake lasted a moment too long. She felt his grip, careful and precise, as if he were consciously calibrating how much pressure a human hand could take. Which was a strange thing to think about a handshake. She pulled her hand back and rubbed her fingers without thinking. "You have very cold hands." "I have always been so," he said. Something flickered in those gray eyes. Amusement? Pain? It was gone too fast to read. He turned to Thermal and began to speak about her technique, and Isla forgot about the cold hands because the man knew art. Not the way collectors knew art, which was mostly the way investors knew stocks. He knew it the way someone who had spent a lifetime, a very long lifetime, watching people create things knew it. He spoke about the tension between her color fields, the controlled violence of her brushwork, the way the canvas seemed to breathe. His observations were precise and deeply specific in a way that made her feel genuinely seen. "The lower left quadrant," he said, pausing. "There is a hesitation there, a moment where the confidence of the stroke falters." Isla blinked. That was exactly the section she'd been arguing with at 2 a.m. "You can see that?" "I see a great deal," he said, and the way he said it made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Not in fear, but in the sudden, electric awareness that this man was paying more attention to her than anyone had paid to her in her entire life. He bought the painting. The number he offered made Ellis's professionalism visibly crack. Then he proposed a commission, a portrait, of himself. "I rarely permit it," he said, "but I find myself intrigued by what you might see." She said yes. Of course she said yes. She was broke. He was offering a small fortune. And she was already itching to figure out how his face worked. Those shadows that seemed to cling to the hollows of his cheeks in ways that defied the gallery's overhead lighting. He left, and the room's temperature rose by what felt like 3 degrees. Chloe appeared at her side. "Please tell me you got his number." "He's a client, Chloe. He looked at you like you were the only painting in the room. Get his number." The first sitting confirmed 2 things Isla had suspected and 1 thing she had not. Suspected, Kaylin was wealthy to a degree that bordered on the obscene, arriving at her studio in a car that cost more than the building. Also suspected, he was strange. The kind of strange that wasn't a red flag so much as a red banner, unfurled and flapping in a strong wind, with the word strange embroidered on it in Gothic lettering. Not suspected, he did not appear to breathe. She noticed it 30 minutes into the sitting. He was positioned in the old leather chair she used for portrait subjects, angled to catch the late evening light from the window. He sat with a stillness that she had initially found useful. Most sitters fidgeted, shifted, needed breaks. Kaylin was motionless. It was a portraitist's dream. Until she realized it was wrong. His chest did not rise and fall. There was no subtle expansion of the rib cage, no unconscious sigh, no shift of the shoulders that comes with filling and emptying the lungs. He was as still as the chair he sat in. She watched for a full 2 minutes, brush hovering, looking for the telltale motion. Nothing. She considered the possibilities. He was holding his breath? For 2 minutes? While sitting perfectly still with no visible discomfort? She looked at her canvas, then back at him. She held her own breath and tried to sit still. She lasted 45 seconds before her lungs staged a revolt. "You're very good at sitting still," she said, testing. "I have had a great deal of practice," he replied. "How much practice, exactly?" A pause, the faintest suggestion of a smile. "More than you would believe." She painted and she watched. The shadows on his face continued to misbehave. They pooled in the hollows of his cheeks and the orbits of his eyes, with a depth and permanence that didn't track with the light source. She adjusted her lamp. The shadows didn't change. She moved the lamp to the other side of the room. The shadows still didn't change. She was a trained artist. She understood how light worked. Light did not work like this. She didn't say anything. But she started a list on her phone, hidden behind her easel. Things that are wrong with Kaylin. 1. Room temperature skin, and not in a good way. 2. Does not appear to breathe. 3. Shadows on face don't respond to light changes. 4. Moved from chair to window to look at a painting. Didn't see him actually move, just suddenly was there. Over the next 3 sittings, the list grew. 5. Made a reference to the Siege of Vienna, and then corrected himself like he'd said too much. 6. Knows the name of a pigment maker in Florence who has been dead since 1740. Described the man's technique in present tense, then switched to past. 7. No phone, no watch. Does not check the time, but always leaves at exactly the same hour, with increasing urgency as the weeks shorten and dawn comes earlier. 8. Gremlin won't go near him. Gremlin goes near everyone. Gremlin went near the gas meter reader, and that man smelled like salami. 9. I have never seen him eat, drink, or use the bathroom. 10. His reflection in the studio mirrors is wrong. Not absent, just slightly delayed, like it's catching up. She tried to photograph him, twice. The first time, her phone camera produced a blur. Not motion blur, because he'd been sitting still, but a soft, dreamy distortion, as if the lens couldn't quite commit to his existence. The second time, the phone simply crashed. "Did you just attempt to photograph me?" he asked, without turning around. "I was checking my messages." "You were holding the phone at portrait angle and said cheese under your breath." "I have a very quiet texting style." The smallest crack appeared in his composure. Not a smile, a fracture. A micro-expression of amusement that was there and gone in an instant, but that she caught because she had been staring at his face for 40 collective hours and had become, against her will, the world's foremost expert in the minute movements of his facial muscles. She told Chloe everything. Chloe, to her credit, did not suggest Isla was losing her mind. Chloe suggested something worse. Maybe he's just European. "Chloe, the man does not breathe." "My ex didn't listen. Same energy." "I'm being serious. I moved a 200-watt light source across the room, and the shadows on his face didn't move. His reflection is delayed. My cat who loves everyone, treats him like a biohazard." And he referenced a pigment maker who died in 1740 like he'd had lunch with the guy last week. "So he's eccentric and well-read." "He's room temperature. I touched his hand again when he was leaving, and he's the same temperature as my countertop. Chloe, that is not a human body temperature." Chloe was quiet for a long moment. "Okay, that one's weird. What are you going to do?" "I don't know, but I'm going to find out." She set traps, small ones, designed to confirm rather than confront. She positioned a large mirror behind her easel, angled so she could see his reflection while she painted. His reflection was there, he wasn't invisible, but it was wrong in a way that took her 3 sittings to identify. It lagged. When he turned his head, the reflection followed a half-second later, as if it were receiving the information on delay. She timed it with her heartbeat. The reflection was always exactly 1 beat behind. She dug a COVID-era infrared forehead thermometer out of her bathroom drawer and during a break in the 4th sitting, aimed it at him while pretending to check her own temperature first. She pressed it to her forehead. 98.4, normal, human, alive. Then, casually, she pointed it at him. "Mind if I check yours? There's something going around." He held still. She pressed the trigger. The display blinked, cycled, and returned. ERR. She tried again. ERR. A third time from a different angle. ERR. The thermometer worked fine on her, on the wall, on Gremlin, who tolerated it with the exhausted patience of a cat who had survived worse indignities. On Kaylin, it simply refused to produce a number. She added it to the list. 11. Does not register on infrared thermometer. Body does not emit detectable heat. She also launched what she privately called the food offensive. At every sitting she offered him something: coffee, tea, a slice of pizza, takeout Thai, a cookie from the bakery on the corner. He refused each one with increasingly baroque politeness. The coffee. "I find I have already taken refreshment." The pizza. "My constitution does not favor such fare, though the aroma is most agreeable." The cookie, which was from the best bakery in the neighborhood, still warm, chocolate chunk. He held it for a moment, looked at it with an expression she could only describe as nostalgic, and set it gently on the table. "I am unable to partake. I wish that I could." That one almost broke her, not because it proved anything, but because for a single, unguarded second, he had looked at a cookie the way a man looks at something he lost a very long time ago. 12. Has refused every food and drink offered across 4 sittings. Cookie reaction suggests he wants to eat, but physically cannot. The evidence mounted, and the myths from pop culture fell away one by one. But what remained was undeniable. He was not human. She didn't know what he was, but she knew what he wasn't. And what he wasn't was a normal man with cold hands and good posture. The night everything changed, she was ready. It was the 7th sitting. She had been painting for 2 hours, the silence between them thick with the charged electric quality it always had. He was in the leather chair, still as marble, his gray eyes fixed on some point beyond the walls of her studio. She set down her brush. "I know you're not human," she said. The silence that followed was not like other silences. It was the silence of a detonation, the moment after the blast, before the sound catches up. He did not move. He did not breathe, which, she now understood, was not something he did anyway. "That is a remarkable statement," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "You don't breathe. Your skin is the temperature of a kitchen counter. Your reflection is on a half-second delay. You referenced a siege that happened in 1683 and a pigment maker who died 300 years ago, like you were there for both. You never eat. My cat is afraid of you and Gremlin is afraid of nothing. My phone can't photograph you. And right now, your pupils just dilated to twice their normal size, which I know because I have been staring at your eyes for 40 hours and I have a degree in observational art." She was shaking. She could hear it in her own voice. But she kept her eyes on his, and she did not look away. "You are more perceptive than I anticipated," he said quietly. "I'm a portrait painter. It's literally my job to see people. So, what are you?" He was silent for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was different. The careful, polished veneer of Kaelin stripped away, leaving something older and rawer underneath. "My name is not Kaelin. It is Kieran. I am 587 years old. I am a king, and I am what your mythology would call a vampire." The word hung in the air between them like a dropped glass, still falling, not yet shattered. "Okay," Isla said. Her voice was very calm, the kind of calm that comes from the part of the brain that has decided the situation is so far beyond normal parameters that panic would be redundant. "Okay, a vampire, sure. That actually explains a lot, if I'm being honest. The breathing thing was really bothering me." "You are taking this remarkably well." "I am having a delayed reaction. Give me about 30 seconds and I'll probably scream." She did not scream. She sat down on her paint-stained stool, very carefully, and put her hands on her knees. Gremlin, who had been hiding behind a stack of canvases since Kieran arrived, emerged to press against her ankles. "The gifts," she said. "The pigment, the heater, that was you." "Yes." "The landlord's tax audit." "Also yes." "The car that almost hit me last month. The one that swerved at the last second for no reason." "There was a reason. It was me." She looked at him, and for the first time she saw past the sculpted stillness and the impossible perfection to the thing underneath. A vast, aching loneliness so profound it had its own gravity. He was watching her the way a man dying of thirst watches rain fall on the other side of a window. "Why?" she asked. "Why me? You're a 500-year-old vampire king. You could have anyone. Why are you sitting in my terrible studio letting me paint you and pretending to be a man named Kaelin?" "Because you are my bloodmate," he said, and the word sounded like it cost him something to say. "A bond I believed was a myth, a single soul whose essence is a perfect harmonic to my own. I sensed you 3 weeks ago, and I have not known peace since." "That's—" She stopped, started again. "That is simultaneously the most romantic and the most terrifying thing anyone has ever said to me. I understand if you wish me to leave." "I didn't say that." The words came out before she could stop them, and she realized, with a lurch of something that was not quite fear, that she meant them. She should be running. She should be calling the police, though what she would tell them was unclear. "Yes, officer, my client is a vampire. Evidence? His reflection is on a delay and my cat doesn't like him." They'd section her before midnight, but she didn't want to run. The pull she'd felt from the first moment, The recognition, the rightness, the sense of something clicking into place. It was the bond. She understood that now. And understanding it didn't make it feel less real. It made it feel more real, because now she had a name for the thing that had been keeping her up at night, filling her sketchbooks with his face, making her heart do acrobatics every time he walked into her studio. "I need time," she said. "I need to think. And I need you to answer my questions. All of them. Honestly. Ask." She looked at him, at Kieran, not Kaylin, and she saw, beneath the ageless marble exterior, a flicker of hope so raw it made her chest hurt. "Do you eat people?" "I feed. I do not kill. I have not killed for sustenance in over 300 years. Can you go in the sun?" "No, it would destroy me." "Do you sleep in a coffin?" Something happened to his face. It took her a moment to identify it because she had never seen it before. He almost smiled. "I have a bed. It is a very good bed. I am a king. I do not sleep in boxes." She felt a wild, inappropriate laugh building in her chest. "Right. Sorry. I aimed an infrared thermometer at you and it returned an error code. I offered you a cookie and you looked at it like it had personally betrayed you. And now you're telling me you have a bed? I'm recalibrating in real time here. You pointed a thermometer at me? You didn't notice?" "I noticed. I assumed it was an art tool I was not familiar with. There have been many new tools since I last observed a painter at work." "When was that?" "Vermeer was still alive." She opened her mouth, closed it. "Okay, we're coming back to that. But one more question for tonight. The bond, the bloodmate thing. Does it make me feel things? Are these feelings real, or are they supernatural?" His expression grew very still and very serious. "The bond creates resonance, recognition, an awareness of the other. But it does not manufacture love, Isla. What you feel, whatever you feel, is your own. I would not take that from you. I would not take anything from you." She nodded slowly. "Okay. Come back tomorrow night, same time. And Kieran?" She held up her phone. "I'm going to figure out how to photograph you if it kills me." "It will not kill you," he said, "though it may kill the phone." She did not sleep that night. She sat on her studio floor with Gremlin in her lap and a mug of cold coffee, and she thought about what it meant that the universe had decided her soulmate was a man who was, by any biological standard, dead. "He's room temperature, Gremlin," she said. "My soulmate has the body heat of a desk." Gremlin purred. He had decided that now that the threat had been identified and named, it was less interesting, and had resumed his primary occupation of shedding on dark clothing. The next night, Kieran came back. And the night after. And the one after that. The sittings changed. They were no longer a portraitist studying a subject. They were two people learning each other across a divide that should have been uncrossable. He answered every question she asked with a directness that was sometimes brutal. Yes, the thirst was constant. Yes, her blood, specifically, was the most compelling thing he had ever encountered. Yes, it required active, ongoing effort not to lose control around her. He told her this without drama, the way an alcoholic might explain the presence of a bottle. Not with shame, but with the clear-eyed honesty of someone who has managed a dangerous thing for a very long time. She painted while he talked. He told her about the centuries, not the grand historical sweep, but the texture of them, the way the first 100 years felt like a long, slow scream, the way the silence inside his own chest had taken 200 years to stop being terrifying and start being just the background hum of his existence, the way he had stopped remembering his human wife's face around year 300 and had tried, for 50 years, to paint it from memory before accepting that it was gone. "You paint?" she asked. "I did, badly. I abandoned the effort when it became clear that immortality does not confer talent." "I could have told you that. Talent isn't about time, it's about paying attention. Then I am very talented at paying attention to you, he said, and there was a warmth in his voice that had nothing to do with body temperature. She laughed. The sound surprised them both. It was the first time laughter had existed in the same room as the truth of what he was, and it changed the air between them. He looked at her as if she'd performed a miracle. "What?" she said. "I have not made anyone laugh in a very long time." "That's because you talk like a Gothic novel. The silence inside my own chest." "Kieran, you need a PR team." "I do not know what that is." "I know you don't. That's part of your charm." The Volkov clan made their move on a Tuesday. Isla knew something was wrong before she knew what. She'd developed a sensitivity to the night's mood since learning the truth about Kieran, a hyper-awareness of temperature drops and unexplained shadows that was either supernatural intuition or extremely productive anxiety. She was walking home from the corner store, a bag of groceries in one arm and Gremlin's prescription cat food in the other, kidney diet, his one medical vulnerability. When she felt the air change, it wasn't the charged electric cold of Kieran's presence. It was something meaner, something that smelled, faintly, of old copper and cruelty. She walked faster. She didn't run. Running triggered chase instincts in predators, and she'd been doing a lot of reading about predators lately. But she covered the 3 blocks to her studio at a pace that would have impressed her old track coach. She made it inside, locked the door, and called Kieran. He had, reluctantly, and with the technical proficiency of a man who had been alive since before the printing press, acquired a phone. It rang once. "There's something outside," she said. "Not you, something else." The silence on the other end was absolute. Then, very quietly, "Do not leave the studio. I am coming." He was there in 4 minutes. He came through the window, her 6th floor window, and landed in her studio with a silence that defied the laws of physics and scared Gremlin so badly the cat didn't come out from under the sink for 2 hours. "You could use the door," she said. "I have a door. It has a handle and everything." "The door is being watched." His voice was different. The careful, controlled Kieran she knew was gone. In his place was something older and colder. A predator whose stillness was no longer contemplative, but coiled. "There are 2 vampires in the alley. They are not mine." "Whose are they?" "A rival. His name is Dmitri. He leads a clan of... The polite term would be scavengers. The accurate term involves language I would not use in your presence." "I'm a New Yorker. I've heard language." "Not from the 15th century, you haven't." He moved to the window, a blur that her eyes refused to track, and looked out. "They are scouts, testing the perimeter. He knows about you." "About the bloodmate thing?" "About you specifically, that I have a weakness." Isla put down the bag of groceries. She picked up a palette knife, looked at it, put it down, and picked up the UV curing lamp she used for certain resin techniques. It was industrial grade, 600 watts, and produced UV light at a frequency that gave her a sunburn if she wasn't careful. "Will this hurt a vampire?" she asked, holding it up. Kieran looked at the lamp. He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but a crack in the ancient composure. "That," he said slowly, "is an extremely interesting question." The fire came 2 nights later, an arson job disguised as a gas leak in the apartment below. Kieran sensed the accelerant before the first flame caught. He evacuated her, not by carrying her, because she'd made it clear that being carried out of danger like a Gothic heroine was not compatible with her self-image, but by guiding her to the fire escape while he dealt with the 2 Volkov operatives responsible. She dealt with the cat. Gremlin, 7 pounds of pure survival instinct, had wedged himself behind the refrigerator and was not coming out for anyone, including the woman who paid for his kidney diet. Isla, coughing through the smoke, got on her knees, reached behind the refrigerator, and extracted the cat by the scruff while the building's fire alarm screamed. She was on the street in 3 minutes, blanket from a firefighter around her shoulders, Gremlin vibrating with rage in her arms. She looked up. On the roof of the building across the street, a shadow moved. She knew the shape of that shadow. She'd been painting it for weeks. "Thank you," she said, too quietly for any human to hear. The shadow inclined its head. The next morning, Kieran told her, 2 of Dimitri's lieutenants were found as desiccated husks on the steps of his stronghold, crumbled to dust by the first touch of the sun. Kieran had left them there, positioned to catch the dawn. It was a message. "That's horrifying," she said. "Yes." "They tried to burn me alive." "Yes." "Okay, I'm processing the ethics of this in real time, and I'm landing on conflicted but not sorry. Is that bad?" "It is honest." "You keep saying that like honesty is a virtue. In my experience, honesty is mostly just uncomfortable." "I have had 587 years of comfort," he said. "I find I prefer uncomfortable." Dimitri came himself. The night of the attack, the air was wrong, heavy, predatory, charged with a violence that Isla could feel in her teeth. Kieran had tried to warn her. "Leave the city," he'd said, using the tone of a man who was not accustomed to his instructions being ignored. She'd refused. "This is my home, my studio, my work. I'm not running from some vampire gang war." "It is not a gang war. It is a territorial dispute between—" "That's a gang war, Kieran, with fangs." She hadn't run, but she'd prepared. The UV curing lamp was plugged in behind her largest canvas, angled toward the door. She'd rigged a tripwire, fishing line, invisible in low light, across the threshold. It wasn't connected to anything mechanical. It was connected to a bucket of turpentine balanced on the top shelf. Turpentine was flammable. She had a lighter. She was an artist, not a soldier. But she was a resourceful artist who'd grown up in a rough neighborhood and had spent the last 2 weeks reading everything she could find about the vulnerabilities of the undead. They came at 3 a.m. The door exploded inward. 3 of them. The first through the door hit the tripwire and caught a bucket of turpentine full in the face. He staggered, blinded, and Isla hit the UV lamp. 600 watts of concentrated ultraviolet light flooded the doorway. The turpentine-soaked vampire screamed, a sound that was less a human voice and more the shriek of something that had been profoundly wronged by physics. His skin began to smoke. He lurched backward into the second figure, a large enforcer who shoved him aside and came at Isla with the flat, dead eyes of something that had stopped being a person a long time ago. She grabbed the lamp like a weapon and swung it toward him. The UV light caught his face, and he flinched, snarling, throwing up an arm to shield his eyes. Then Kieran came through the window. What followed took less than 5 seconds, but Isla saw every fraction of it with the crystalline clarity of absolute terror. Kieran was not a man. He was not even a predator. He was a force. Ancient, furious, and utterly without mercy. The first enforcer, still smoking from the UV burns, simply ceased to exist. One moment he was there, the next, his head was separated from his body, and both were dissolving into fine gray dust. The second enforcer died with Kieran's hand around his throat, his neck collapsing inward like wet paper. Only Dimitri remained. He stood in the wreckage of her doorway, and for the first time, his arrogance was cracked. He looked at the 2 piles of dust. He looked at Kieran, whose eyes blazed with a faint, terrible luminescence, whose fangs were extended and streaked with blood, whose entire being radiated a fury so cold it made the air crystallize. "Leave," Kieran said, and his voice was the voice of a king. Not a request, not a threat, but a fundamental reorganization of reality. "And know that if you or yours ever come near her again, I will unmake your line. Every fledgling, every ally, every stone of your pathetic stronghold. I will be so thorough that in 100 years, no one will remember you existed." Dimitri ran. The studio was silent. Kieran stood with his back to her, his shoulders rigid, his hands clenched at his sides. She could see the effort it was taking him to pull the predator back inside the man, to pack away the ancient killing thing he had just been and become again the person she knew. "Kieran," she said. He turned. The blood was a crimson smear across his mouth. His fangs were still out. His eyes still held that faint inner light. He looked like exactly what he was, a beautiful monster, a 500-year-old engine of death, a creature so far beyond her world that the gap should have been unbridgeable. "I would have gotten the second one," she said, "with the lamp. I want that on the record." The predator cracked. It was not a smile. It was more like the structural failure of a dam. A sound escaped him that was almost, not quite, a laugh. It was the sound of 5 centuries of control, losing an argument with a woman holding a UV lamp. "You are," he said, "the most impossible creature I have ever encountered." "I'm the impossible one? You just turned 2 people into dust." "They were already dust. I merely accelerated the process." She started to laugh. It was the wrong response. Hysterical, inappropriate, the laughter of someone whose nervous system had decided that since fight or flight were both inadequate, it might as well try comedy. She laughed until her ribs hurt, and when she finally stopped, she found that the fear was gone. Not buried, not suppressed. Gone. In its place was a certainty that had been building for weeks and could no longer be denied. She loved him. Not the idea of him, not the mystery or the power or the supernatural bond. She loved the man who almost smiled when she teased him, who talked about his own loneliness with the quiet precision of a surgeon describing a wound, who had been alive for nearly 6 centuries and still couldn't figure out how to use a phone. "When this is over," she said, "you and I need to have a conversation about what happens next." "I would like that," he said, and for the first time his voice held no distance, no careful control, no archaic formality. It was just a man's voice, raw and honest and afraid of hope. The conversation happened the next night in the ruin of her studio. They sat on the floor amid the broken glass and the turpentine stain, and the 2 small piles of gray dust that Isla was trying very hard not to think about. "Dimitri," she said first, "is it over? It will be by dawn." His voice was matter-of-fact in a way that was more chilling than any threat. "My sentinels located his stronghold 3 hours ago. He had 4 lieutenants remaining. By the time the sun rises, he will have none, and his territory will belong to my line. He himself fled the city. Whether he survives is no longer relevant. He has nothing left to command." "You're dismantling his entire operation in one night." "He threatened what is mine. There is no proportionate response to that. There is only the complete one." She looked at him, at the calm, clinical precision with which he described the annihilation of a rival, and she understood something about the world she was considering entering. It was not a world of half measures. It was a world where the stakes were permanent, and the consequences were absolute. She either accepted that, all of it, or she walked away. "Okay," she said. "Then let's talk about the other thing. If I choose this," she said, "if I choose you, what do I lose?" He did not soften it. She had told him not to, and he had listened. "The sun. You will never feel it again. The warmth of your own skin, your heartbeat, the ability to grow old. Your friends will age and you will not, and eventually you will have to let them go or watch them leave. Food will become meaningless. Sleep will become optional. The world you know, the world of coffee and mornings and growing things, will become a memory." She thought about mornings. She thought about the way dawn crept across her floorboards and touched her face, waking her before the alarm. She thought about coffee, the smell of it, the ritual, the first sip that made the day real. She thought about Chloe, growing old while Isla stayed frozen. She thought about the feel of sun on her skin during her morning run along the waterfront. The grief was enormous. It filled the room, as real and as present as either of them. "What do I gain?" she said, though she already knew. "Me," he said simply. "For as long as the stars burn, a kingdom, a purpose, senses that would make your art, Isla, if you could see what I see, the colors that exist beyond human perception, the textures of moonlight, the architecture of sound." He paused. "And you would never be alone. The bond is not a leash, it is a bridge, a permanent, unbreakable bridge between your consciousness and mine. And my career." She said it flatly, because flatness was the only way to say it without breaking. "I was finally getting somewhere, Kieran. That gallery show, Ellis called today. 2 more collectors want meetings. A reviewer from the Times was at the opening. I've been clawing toward this for 10 years, and it's happening now, right now, and you're asking me to disappear." "I am not asking you to do anything. I am telling you what the choice involves." "I know. That's what makes it worse." She pulled her knees to her chest. "If I vanish, and I'd have to vanish, right? I can't exactly keep taking gallery meetings at noon. Then Isla Carrick the artist just stops, mid-career. No explanation. People will assume I had a breakdown, or died, or moved to a commune. Everything I built becomes a footnote." He was quiet for a long time. "You could paint under another name, in another era. The work would not stop, only the identity." "The identity is the work. The work comes from being me, from being alive and frustrated and broke and fighting for it. Can a dead woman make art that matters?" "I do not know," he said, and the honesty of it landed harder than any reassurance would have. "I have watched artists for 5 centuries. The greatest of them were driven by something I recognized, a hunger that was not unlike the thirst. Whether that hunger survives the transformation, I cannot promise you. I can only tell you that you would have eternity to find out." "That's a hell of a gamble." "Yes, it is." She sat with that. The gallery, the reviews, the momentum she'd spent a decade building. She thought about the portrait of him, half-finished on her easel, the best work she'd ever done, and she knew it, and she'd done it while falling in love with a dead man. Maybe the hunger wasn't about being alive. Maybe it was about paying attention. And she had never paid more attention to anything than she had to him. She thought about it for a long time. Long enough that the candle she'd lit, the power was out, vampires had kicked in her fuse box, burned down to a pool of wax. "I want 1 day," she said. "1 day? 1 more day in the sun. Tomorrow. I want to feel it on my face. I want to have coffee at my cafe and sit with Chloe and walk along the waterfront and say goodbye to all of it. Properly. Not running, not in fear. Just a last day. I cannot be with you for it." "I know. That's part of the goodbye." She reached out and took his cold hand. His fingers, as always, were the temperature of stone. She held them anyway. "Tomorrow night, when I come to you, I'll be ready." She spent her last day as a human with ferocious intention. She woke at dawn and lay in the sunlight until it was warm on her face, memorizing the sensation, the weight of it, the color of it through her closed eyelids, the way it heated the skin on her forearms in patches where the window let it through. She made coffee and drank it like a sacrament, tasting every bitter, beautiful note. The hardest part was Chloe. They met at their cafe, the one on 7th with the wobbly table and the barista who always spelled Isla's name wrong. Chloe arrived in her scrubs, fresh off a 12-hour shift, already talking about the patient who'd proposed to her in the ICU and the ongoing saga of her mother's hip replacement. Isla listened. She laughed. She memorized the way Chloe's hands moved when she told a story, the specific cadence of her outrage, the way she stirred her coffee counterclockwise because she claimed it tasted better that way. "I need to tell you something. Isla said when the story slowed. Chloe's face changed. The nurse in her surfaced, the one who read bad news in body language before it was spoken. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. I'm going away. With Kalen. He has a place in Europe and he's asked me to come, and I've said yes. It's sudden, I know, but it's right. How sudden? When? Tonight. Tonight. Chloe set her coffee down. Isla, you've known this man for a month. I know. You don't even know what he does for a living. He's in private acquisitions. Not technically a lie. He acquired territory, loyalty, and occasionally the severed heads of his enemies. Chloe, I know how this sounds, but I need you to trust me. I'm not being reckless. I'm making a choice, and it's the most deliberate choice I've ever made. You're scaring me. I know. I'm sorry. Isla reached across the wobbly table and took Chloe's hands. I'm going to be out of reach for a while. Maybe a long while. I can't explain why, and I know that's not fair. But I need you to know, you are the best person I have ever known. You are the first person I'd call in any crisis, and the last person I'd ever want to hurt. And I need you to take Gremlin. Chloe's eyes were shining. You're giving me the cat. He has a kidney condition. He eats the prescription food, not the cheap stuff, and he likes to sleep on the bathroom mat. He will destroy at least one piece of furniture in the first week. Consider it a love letter from me. Isla, please don't try to talk me out of it. Please, just let me have this. Chloe was quiet for a long time. The cafe buzzed around them. The barista called out someone else's name, wrong. If he hurts you, Chloe said finally, her voice thick, I will find him. I don't care how rich he is or where in Europe he lives. I will find him, and I will make his life a medical emergency. Isla laughed, and the laugh turned into something dangerously close to a sob, and she pulled Chloe into a hug so tight it probably qualified as a clinical intervention. I love you, she said into Chloe's shoulder. I love you, and I'm sorry, and please remember to buy the prescription food. She ran along the waterfront after that. She needed the wind. She needed to feel her own heartbeat, strong and fast and alive, one last time. She watched the light change on the water, gold to copper to rose, and she committed every shade to memory, an artist's goodbye. Back in her studio, she sat with Gremlin in her lap and looked at her paintings. All of them. The earliest clumsy student work, Thermal, the half-finished portrait of Kieran that had started everything. She thought about Ellis's call, the collectors, the Times reviewer, the career that was finally happening. She had packed a bag with 3 things, her favorite sable brush, a sketchbook, and the cobalt pigment that had appeared on her doorstep from a man she hadn't known was a vampire king. Everything else, the canvases, the paints, the studio, the life, she was leaving behind. You're going to a good home, she told Gremlin, who did not care. Try not to destroy her furniture. Gremlin purred. He would absolutely destroy her furniture. They both knew it. At sunset, she walked to the keep. The crimson gift was not what she expected. She expected pain. Instead, there was a sharp, brief sting, his fangs at her throat, precise and gentle. And then a sensation like falling backward into warm water. The world softened. The colors of the throne room, the obsidian, the silver, the moonlight, blurred into a watercolor wash. She felt his consciousness touch hers through the bond, and it was vast, and it was ancient, and it was unbearably lonely, and it was hers. Her heartbeat slowed. The frantic thump-thump that had been the metronome of her entire existence became a waltz, then a lullaby, then silence. She waited for the terror. It didn't come. Instead, there was a peculiar peace, the peace of a long, exhausting race finally ending, the finish line crossed, the body allowed to stop. When she opened her eyes, the world had been repainted, not in the dim, muted tones she'd expected from a creature of the night. In more color, so much more color, that her first instinct was to cry, and her second was to find a canvas. The moonlight streaming through the Gothic windows wasn't white. It was a symphony of silver, cobalt, and a shade of violet that she had no human name for. She could see the grain of the obsidian throne from across the room. She could see the individual threads in the velvet she lay on. She could hear a spider spinning its web in a corner of the ceiling, 60 feet above. Kieran was beside her, his hand in hers. For the first time, his skin didn't feel cold. It felt like hers. They were the same temperature now, cool, still, and perfectly matched. Around the edges of the throne room, the courtiers had shifted. She could sense them now, not just see them, but feel them, their ancient presences like cold stars in the dark. They were watching her. Some with curiosity, some with something harder to read. 1. A tall, gaunt figure with the bone structure of a medieval saint stepped forward and inclined his head. The gesture was not warm. It was the careful, calculated acknowledgement of a new piece on a very old chessboard. "They're not thrilled," Isla observed. "They have not had a queen in 5 centuries. They are recalibrating." Is recalibrating vampire for plotting? Sometimes, but not tonight. Tonight they are simply surprised. I have not surprised them in a very long time. The gaunt courtier was still watching her. She met his gaze. Her new eyes had no trouble holding it. And after a long, charged moment, something shifted in his expression. Not friendliness. Respect, maybe. Or the beginning of it. "How do you feel?" Kieran asked. She sat up. The movement was fluid, effortless, as if her new body had been waiting for her to figure out how to drive it. She looked at her hands. They were pale, smooth, and very still. "I feel," she searched for the word, "quiet. It's quiet inside." The heartbeat. "Yeah." She put a hand to her chest. Nothing. The absence should have been terrifying. Instead, it was like the silence after a long, loud party. Not empty, but restful. "I thought I'd miss it more." "You may yet." Kieran. She looked at him, and with her new eyes she saw things she'd never seen before. The fine lines of power that shimmered beneath his skin, the ancient weight in his gaze. And beneath it all, a tenderness so carefully guarded it had taken her enhanced perception to find it. "How many colors are there that I couldn't see before?" He tilted his head. "I stopped counting around the 3rd century. I need a canvas. Do you have paint? Do vampires have paint?" "We have a great deal of things. We have had a very long time to accumulate them." "I need paint, and I need it now. There's a color in that moonlight that I don't have a name for, and it's going to drive me insane." He stood and offered her his hand. She took it, and he pulled her to her feet with a gentleness that was at odds with the strength she could now sense in him. The same strength she could feel in herself, coiled and waiting. He led her to the great window overlooking the city. The lights below were no longer just lights. They were a vast, shimmering tapestry of thermal signatures and electromagnetic frequencies and the tiny, brilliant sparks of mortal lives. She could feel them, all of them, the thrumming warmth of a million heartbeats she would never have again. "This is your kingdom now," Kieran said. "Our kingdom." She looked at the city, and she looked at him, and she looked at her own pale, still hands, and she felt the enormous weight of what she had gained and what she had lost pressing on her from both sides. "Okay," she said, "but first, paint. And if I have to spend eternity in a castle that has no natural light, I am going to need a very sophisticated lighting setup. Do vampires have electricians?" "We have minions." "Please never call them that again." "Servants?" "Worse." "Staff." "Better. We're going to work on your vocabulary. 500 years of talking like a funeral announcement ends tonight. He looked at her, and he smiled. A real smile. Not the fracture, not the almost, not the carefully controlled non-expression she'd spent weeks trying to capture on canvas. A real, genuine, unpracticed smile that transformed his ancient, severe face into something startlingly, impossibly young. It was, she decided, a face she could spend eternity painting. She was going to need a lot of canvas.